Hello everyone, my name is Brian Timmons and I am building my first violin. Welcome to part 1. We start with the mold. The mold is the internal form that the sides of the instrument are shaped around, and this gives the instrument its distinctive profile. The first thing I need to do is cut up some blocks of spruce, and these will be the attachment points for the ribs, the sides. One block goes in the neck, one block goes at the tail end, and 4 blocks in the corners. I'm preparing some hide glue. This is my first time working with this stuff, and it's actually quite enjoyable. The blocks are only lightly tack glued to the mold. I've already made my first mistake. One common theme in this project is errors caused by getting too trim happy, where I remove too much wood. And in this case, the neck block is out of square, so I shim it up with a piece of scrap. Now it's time to prepare the ribs for the side of the instrument. The first thing I do is joint a straight edge. This will be my reference surface that will fit along the floor that I'm using as the base, just to make sure that the back side of the instrument is flat. In order to prepare the ribs to this thickness, scraping is the name of the game. I check and I recheck and try to get this as close to exactly 1 millimeter on the dot as I can. Any thick spots, scrape there. Thin spots, leave them alone. So just how thin is 1 millimeter of wood exactly? Pretty darn thin. Now I'm trimming some of the excess height from my ribs. And it's still leaving myself about 2 millimeters in order to trim back later. Now I'm laying out the flame pattern of the ribs. It's fairly traditional to have alternating flame directions, with the C bouts in the middle kind of forming a contrast to the direction of the upper and lower bouts. And here I'm laying out mirroring segments for each side. And this is where the lower bouts will meet where the end pin is drilled out. And now it's time for the really fun stuff, bending some wood. I have a fairly primitive setup with a hot gun from Harbor Freight, but you know what? It gets the job done. So the first parts of the ribs that are attached are the C bouts in the very middle of the instrument. And yet again, I got way too trim happy. I decided to trim some of the excess width from the C bouts, and I ended up taking off about a millimeter more than I was supposed to. So unfortunately that meant that these original C bouts had to go. Thankfully for me, hide glue is reversible, and the second fit was so much better than the first. Even though I only have the C bouts attached and not the upper and lower bouts, I couldn't resist scraping away a little bit just to see how this was going to look with a little bit of cleanup. The joint where the lower bouts meet each other at the end pin has got to be exactly perfect. Here I'm using a shooting board to plane a perfectly flat joint. A little clear packing tape ensures that the joint pulls itself together tightly. But I noticed after the fact that there was a little dip in the joint, and I can't have that, so I loosened up one side and shimmed it up so that way these ribs would be a perfect 90 degrees to the top and back plate. So I'm trimming down the excess height of the ribs very carefully this time, making sure not to go beyond what I'm supposed to. And it happened yet again. I got way too trim happy. See, corners are supposed to look like this. Unfortunately, I made 3 out of 4 of them look like that before I stopped and realized my mistake. So I had no choice but to butcher the other one to match the other 3. Things not to do next time. And while I was reducing the height of the ribs, I did have a little bit of blowout here on this corner, a little bit of hide glue, and just a little bit of finger pressure just to make sure these chips sit back in place, and it's barely noticeable. Now it's time to start gluing in the linings on the backside. The linings serve 2 purposes. They add some strength to the ribs, and they also provide you additional surface area for the glue to adhere to on the top and back plates. On the upper and lower bout, it's just a simple angled fit, and glue is able to hold them in place. For the C bouts, however, you need to cut a little angled mortise into the blocks just to prevent these things from wanting to pull away. This part is delicate, but it's fun. And now it's time to start preparing the wood for the top and back plates. Checking here at the level, it's obvious that this board is not flat. So plane down the excess and check for level every few strokes. Once you see no light creeping through the bottom edge, you've got a nice flat surface. One area where I had way more difficulty than I expected was getting a good glue joint on the top and back plates. My first glue up of the spruce and maple plates failed because I over-tightened the clamps and torqued the joint out of alignment. Now, the second time, I tightened them a reasonable amount, keeping them in alignment, but for some reason the glue joint didn't take. And what I ended up finding out is that there was wax residue on the bottom of my hand plane that prevented the glue from adhering to itself. For my third attempt at gluing the top, I actually decided to try a rub joint because why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. I'd never done one before, but might as well try it. Alright, no guts, no glory. Now with a rub joint, you do not use any clamps. You merely rub the pieces of wood together with a hot glue until it gels, and then set it aside and let the glue work its magic. Okay, I think that taking the wax off of my jointer plane is probably the solution that I needed, because both of these glue ups look pretty damn good to me. So the maple, pretty good joint all the way up the back side, and same along the front. However, I do notice just some ever so slightly darker spots at the very ends, but I'm not terribly concerned about that because the length I have to work with already there, it still gives me plenty of wiggle room. So I think it's a pretty good joint up to about here and up to about there, which is plenty of room for the violin body and also the button itself. And for the spruce, yeah, I just decided to do a rub joint. And wouldn't you know, it came out flawless. Now it's just a matter of tracing the outline for the top and back plates to start carving away. And that will be covered in part 2. This little trick with the washer to trace an outline is just too cool. Well, the drive belt on my bandsaw gave out, but this cheap little scroll saw from Harbor Freight was a little engine that could. And now just a lot of detail rasping in the edges until it gets to be just right. And in the next video, time to get carving.